It's May 3rd, and I thought it'd be a good day to take a tour of the vegetable garden. The name of our channel is Farm and Ranch Life, and I have to tell you that the vegetable garden is a huge part of life here on the farm. One of our goals here is to be as reliant on things from the farm as possible, and obviously food's a big topic, so let's take a tour of the vegetable garden. I'll show you what all we grow here. You can start right here. We have some leeks. My wife does wonderful things with leeks. Interesting crop. They grow, they pretty much have leeks growing year-round. You can see some of them are starting to flower here. Beautiful flowers. I plant them about once a year, and we have leeks year-round. From there, you can see this has been one of the great surprises in the garden: celery. I've never grown celery before, but I have a pretty good crop of it here. It's just now starting to bolt. We've had it since, since the winter, probably 4 or 5 months, 5 or 6 months. Probably eat celery twice a day. I put it in the morning smoothie, put it in the salads. Tina cooks it in food. Have really enjoyed growing the celery, and we'll probably grow some more. So you can see, good crop here. Now, let's move a little further down the row. Here we have the winter broccoli. We've picked all the big heads off of it, but after you pick the big head off of broccoli, you get all these sprouts. You want to show that right there. Every one of these broccoli plants will have numerous shoots that come up afterwards, and frankly, that's been a great surprise too. We enjoy the shoots as much as we enjoy the big heads, and have been using a lot of them. I'd like to point out something important here as we're starting this tour. Right here, 65 years old. Let me tell you what, having a raised bed with a platform like this where you can sit your butt down and while you're picking and planting makes a big difference. You find ways to get lazy if you're a smart gardener, and this has been a great one for us. So now from there, if you'll follow me, we'll go to this part of the garden right here. Do this a lot. You can see 3 different things planted here. Here we have carrots, which we're picking right now. We have carrots every day. These are red samurai carrots. I probably plant 3 or 4 different kinds of carrots to get different colors. We have blue carrots, or purple, I guess they are. Purple carrots, red carrots, and of course the classic orange carrots. But beside that, I have the curly kale. You can see beautiful plant, curly kale, and then of course the Tuscan kale. You can see the differences between the two. Once again, one of the healthiest foods you can put in your mouth is kale. Very good for you, and we have kale every day. I should probably take a moment now and talk about morning smoothies. I'll go through the garden every morning. I'll pick a little kale, different kinds. I'll pick some carrots like this. I've got some Italian dandelion over there. I'll pick a few spinach leaves, some of the celery that I was just showing you. I'll pull some asparagus out of the asparagus garden. What else? Beet leaves. I'll pull a few baby beet leaves out. And all that goes into the blender with some berries. This morning smoothie, for example, had blueberries from the garden, frozen from last year. They have raspberries and blackberries, also from the farm. The raspberries, granted, came from the store. All that goes into a blender, into a Vitamix, and whoosh, morning smoothie. Special recipe. You heard it here first. So again, that's what we have going here. Now let's keep moving down the garden. So a little further down the garden, here you can see some sunflower. This is a volunteer sunflower, but I'll plant sunflowers all in the garden. A couple of things come from that. You get the bees and the pollinators. In fact, back behind me, I have a whole pollinator garden that I try to attract as many beneficial insects in. The sunflowers attract the bees, and not only that, hey, they're pretty. Nothing wrong with that. So you got some sunflower here. Here you can see the potatoes. These are the red potatoes. Over there's another row of white potatoes, all coming up. I don't know how well you can see this here, but in this row right here, I have some Swiss chard coming up. Swiss chard, and then this is one of our favorite things in the garden right here, That is summer dance cucumbers. I've got a couple of them planted now. They'll crawl up this trellis, and very prolific. We'll eat a lot of cucumbers. And over here you can see some baby celery. I don't know if this is going to make it or not. I don't know if it'll how much production we'll get out of it before it bolts. You know, nature has a way of telling you whether or not things need to be growing or not. And if they start bolting early, or when bugs start really getting on it, I just assume that that's nature's way of saying, time for that crop to be pulled up, thrown into the compost pile, and something fresh and new planted. Always things growing in a Louisiana garden. That's one of the great things about gardening in Louisiana, 12 months out of the year. Maybe the hardest month of all is August, but even then I'll have beans and peas growing. So let's keep moving. There's the onion garden. If there's two staples in this household, it's onions and garlic. I call it number 2. I come into the kitchen and I can smell, and Tina will start telling me I've got this going and that going. I'm going, that's just number 2, onions and garlic. I think she cooks everything with onions and garlic. So we grow a lot of onions, and we'll take a look at the garlic bed in just a minute. You can see the onions here are starting to swell a little bit, and I'll really pour the nutrients to them now to try to make the bulbs as nice as possible. But we grow a lot of onions, so fun thing to have in the garden. Let's move along. Now, continuing on through the garden, here's the tomato row. Every year I vow to plant fewer tomatoes, and it never works. My wife will start to fuss at me because once they get going, it's life in a red state. That's not a political statement. That's a fact that the entire kitchen turns red from tomatoes. So I've gotten smarter through the years. I tend to plant things and then forget what I planted. For example, tomatoes, which ones are which. I generally know what they look like, but this year I started marking everything so I know these are celebrities, those are Cherokee purples. You can see the trellis here. The tomatoes will grow up that, and I'll use this tape to tie the tomatoes. And I'm going to tell you, they'll go to the top of that trellis, drape over, and they'll just be huge plants before it's all over with. You can also see I have some baby beets growing right here. Another trick I've learned through the years is constantly plant stuff. I've been planting beets about every 2 or 3 weeks since winter. These are the youngest ones. You'll see some full-grown beets in a minute, but I can put beets in here and they work very well with the tomatoes. Also, you can see right around there on the back side of this row of tomatoes, I have bush beans growing. As you all know, bush beans will fix nitrogen into the garden, kind of feed the tomatoes a little bit, and I get the inoculant that I use in the food plots out in the field and inoculate these bush beans to make sure that they're good for fixing nitrogen into the soil. Another thing I'd like to show here is you'll see wood chips. I've been covering the garden in a heavy mulch for years now. The last 2 or 3 years I've been using alfalfa hay. I'll do a stack like that, and you'll see a little later on where I've been using the hay still. This year I'm transitioning a lot of the garden over to wood chips just to put a different nutrient profile into the soil as it breaks down. What I know is that both the hay as well as the wood chips create a heaven for earthworms. They just thrive underneath this, as well as do roly-polies. I'll probably have the finest crop of roly-polies in the world. Doodle bugs, we also call them. And they're good. They eat the dead matter and contribute to the organic matter as they eat decomposed leaves and so forth that go into the soil. So, as I mentioned earlier when I talked about this wonderful platform that I'm sitting on, as you garden a lot, you learn to be lazy. Not only do I have a place to sit, now I don't have to weed as much because I keep heavy mulch on the garden. So that moderates moisture, moderates temperature, and keeps the weeds out. Can you beat that? Plus you get the nutrients of the rain leaching through the wood chips into the soil. It's a win-win-win. So let's keep moving. Here you can see a couple of cabbages in the foreground. I have cabbages here, some more cabbages back over there. You know, I'll put things where I have an open spot when the time comes. You can also see some beautiful lettuces growing here, and I don't know if you can see these. Here's some more carrots. I forgot to tag these carrots, so I really have no idea which kind they are, but what I do know is they'll be good. So in this little space right here, I have carrots growing, I have lettuce growing, and I have celtuce. Now celtuce is something I've never grown before till this year. It's been fun. It's in the lettuce family, and when it's small, you'll see some in a minute, it's very tasty. We just mix it in with a salad. According to what we've read, when it gets bigger, the stalks are good, and I'm going to tell you what we found. It's bitter. Now, maybe there's a magic recipe that makes it better when it gets full size like this, but we haven't found it. And you can take a look at this. That's quite a plant. All of this celtuce is coming up today and going to go into the compost pile. I see 3 worms down there in that hole I just dug up. I love that. So, celtuce, fun plant. We'll continue to plant that. And again, right now, it's going to be compost. So, continuing on. Since we're on the subject of celtuce, here's the smaller celtuce. Well, it's not grown up yet. Beautiful plant. This is the red celtuce. This is the green celtuce. It's a beautiful plant, and again, we include it in the salads. They say you can cook with it. Tina has done that once. She made a delicious soup out of it that was quite tasty, and the stalks were maybe that big around, so they kind of fit in there. You can also see some smaller lettuces than the ones I was showing a little earlier. I'll buy every kind of seed, lettuce seed that you can find in the catalog that looks pretty. It's part of my flaw. You know, one thing that's, when it's December and cold and you're looking at the seed catalogs and you see all those beautiful seeds, I tend to go a little overboard. So I'll take a variety of different seed species, lettuce seed species, put them into a jar, shake them up real good, and just spread them out. Whatever comes up, comes up. So you can see some lettuces here, and I'll sprinkle lettuces all through the garden. If I get a little spare spot that's open for a while, I will throw some lettuce seed in there. One of the things that I've learned in growing food plots for deer is I always want living roots as much as possible everywhere at all times. So I'm constantly planting stuff in the garden to have different root varieties, root sizes, as well as different leaf sizes. And besides that, it makes it pretty, and we all like that. So let's take a look down here. I wanted to take just a minute and show this. Actually, what I have planted in here, they haven't come up yet, is Russian fingerling potatoes. I have a row here and here, and I covered them up with this alfalfa hay. This technique was originally championed by a lady called Ruth Stout. She was a wonderful lady and a great gardener, and she used the heavy hay or straw mulch system, and I got that idea looking at her stuff and on YouTube. So I've been doing that, as I mentioned earlier, for 2 or 3 years, and it's great. It's great. It enriches the soil. You can also see some peppers here. These will be going in today. That's one of my afternoon chores. It's much easier to do video than actually the work sometimes, but I'll be composting up. Actually, I'll be composting up the area where you saw the broccoli, and I'll be planting Roma tomatoes there. That's going to be the Roma tomato bed, and the peppers are going to be going where I was just showing you the green celtuce. So something comes out, another something goes in. Let's keep moving. I'm kind of proud of this. Cauliflower. I'm on the cauliflower in the Louisiana gardens, a little finicky. You can grow it. You can see that head's very nice. It's that big around. I find sometimes the cauliflower works great, other times it doesn't. A lot of things will get it here in the south from freezes. It doesn't like it when it gets too hot. It doesn't like it when it's freezing too much. I've seen rain get on it and kind of turn it. But when it works, it's a beautiful plant. So I'll plant quite a bit of cauliflower. If I plant 24 cauliflower plants over time, we might get 6 or 8. But hey, it's worth it. Cauliflower's great. We love it. So quick look at the cauliflower there. You can also see, what can you see? I may be moving fast for the camera. Some garlic chives here. Probably as much for show as anything else, but my wife will use it some, and a couple more cabbages stuck in here. So let's keep going down the row. Got some collards here. Through the winter we had a big collard patch, and when they started bolting, I just pulled them all up, and still had some collard seeds, so I decided to throw a few out. I don't know if it's going to be too late in the year for collards, but there's no doubt we'll get another meal out of this. And as I mentioned earlier, nature will tell you when it's time for collards to be over. We'll start finding worms and stuff in them. Here's some beets that are grown up. I'll tell you that beets are good. I like to eat beets. Perfect size beet, they store well. As I said, I'll plant them 2 or 3 different times so that they're not all ready at once. They do interesting things to the toilet the next day, but I'm not going to go into that right now. And my wife will tell you that she's the nutritionist, I'm the naturalist. I grow things because I like to grow things and I like to eat them. She knows what they're good for. And she'll tell you that it's nitric oxide, something like that. Anyhow, they're good for you. That's what's important to know. And I should also mention that everything you're seeing here is 100% organic. There's never been any inorganic fertilizer, no synthetic fertilizer, no herbicide, no pesticide used in this garden since I created it. I don't remember how many years ago, nor have I tilled it. I do not remember the last time I tilled this garden. It's been a long, long time. Frankly, I can never leave here and move anywhere else because it's taken too long to get this garden soil to be perfect, the best. I don't know how to describe it. So I can't leave the soil. I could leave the house, but I can't leave the soil. And the hay, the wood chips, no-till, the amendments that I use, which are all organic, have all gone to make the soil incredible. So with that bit of bragging, let's keep moving. Moving on, bit of repeat here, but again, I want to show you how I keep planting multiple species together. Here you can see, I think this is Russian red kale. And beside it, I've got some smaller celery. This celery, hopefully it won't bolt. And as I pull the other up to be juiced and into the compost pile, we can start eating off of this. And more of this beautiful kale right here. And then over here, we have Italian dandelion. Kind of a neat plant. I don't know what we're going to do with it, except that I'll pluck a few leaves off of it every morning for the smoothie. And then here are some of the red celtuce. This is going into the compost pile today. This isn't the biggest one, but let's take a look at it, if I can get this thing out of the ground. Yeah, look at that bad boy. Yeah, it's a beautiful plant. I've really had fun with this year. And I now am standing in a pile of worms. Excellent. So, compost pile for now, but that doesn't mean that I won't grow it again, and we'll certainly eat it when it's young. That's what we learned. Here we have green onions. These have been here for 2 or 3 years. You can see they'll start to flower a little bit, and I'll just cut them all off at the ground, and they come back, and if they start bolting, I'll cut them all off at the ground, and that pretty much gives us green onions for salads and things that Tina cooks. I'm not going to say year-round, but a fair chunk of the year. You can also see some baby lettuces here that are coming up. So you got onions and lettuce. I try to keep every square inch of the garden growing. Some baby lettuces, and then I'll move. Let's take a look at this. Garlic. I'm going to walk through the garlic bed. It's quite large. You can see a little bit of arrowleaf clover right here growing up. I'll leave it in there. It fixes a little nitrogen. So, I forgot to mark the garlic. I don't know which kind's which, but I bought 4 or 5 different kinds of garlic. And as I walk through here, you can kind of see the different colors and shapes of it. I think this is a really neat looking garlic right here, the way it grows out like that. It's early May, probably sometime in June I'll be picking this garlic. I planted it in October. This garlic here you can see is robust, I think might be a good word, and it's growing up nicely. Continuing on, I forgot to mark which garlic was what. I think I already mentioned that, but I think this was some Chinese pink, and interestingly it was already done. There's a little asparagus plant there that was a volunteer out of some compost. Somehow it got in there a few years ago and I've left it. That's kind of fun. And then here you'll see some onions that I planted in the fall. They're huge. I don't know if they're going to make bulbs. I've tried fall onions before and they never made the bulb, but they're certainly a beautiful plant and big. And if they bulb out, they'll be fantastic. But we've actually been pulling them up. Let me get up here, I'll show you. I've been pulling some up. And my wife's just been cutting up these parts. Now this looks like it might bulb. I don't know. She's been cutting up some and putting them in stuff, and it's worked just fine. Smells like onion. So another different diversity in the garden. Here you can see a spinach bed. Grow spinach as many months out of the year as possible. We'll freeze it, put it into the freezer as we have extra, and we use it all the time. Here you can see some radishes. Actually, this radish is bolted and going to bloom, but you know what? Bees and pollinators will come to that. A little lettuce mixed in, some other radishes. Every time I walk through the garden, just about, certainly every week, I'll grab a small handful of radish seeds and I'll sprinkle them here and there. Does a great job. They put a deep taproot down so it continues to help with the soil building a little bit. Uh-oh. A weed. Don't see many of those in this garden. So anyhow, that's a tour of the Louisiana spring garden in May. There's one more thing I'd like to show you though before we leave, and it's a garden I actually have taken over a year to prepare this. Let's go take a look at one last thing and then we'll call it a video. A couple of years ago I got interested in a method of gardening called the Back to Eden garden. There's a guy up in Washington State, I believe it is. I'm going to butcher his name, but I think it's Paul Gauchi. Fascinating guy, fabulous gardener. And his deal is wood chips. He uses wood chips and espouses all the benefits of those, which I've talked about a little bit already. So I've taken, what is it, May, almost a year and a half now to prepare this garden. I started with getting several loads of horse compost. My niece raises horses and I got the compost and I spread it out over this area right here. And then I covered that with a tarp for a while to kill all the weeds, and then I came in and I put the wood chips down. That would have been late winter, early spring this year, maybe January. We put the wood chips down. Now, I overdid it a little bit, which is not unusual for me because I think I got the wood chips about this thick on here, which makes my job harder as a gardener. They probably need to be about that deep. So now when I'm planting something to get to mineral soil, I've got to dig a fairly deep hole to get down to mineral soil. You can see I've got a few strawberries growing right here. There's an apple tree I left in here just for chuckles. But the Back to Eden method, I'm very attracted to it, and I'm going to get a little closer here now. I've got what I call the Three Sisters growing over here. It's the first thing I've planted. Today though, however, before today's over with, I'm going to come and make a couple of rows of sweet potatoes. I just got them in the mail, so I'm going to make, what I plan on planting in here is a lot of the crawly things. It's a fairly big space. Sweet potatoes crawl a lot, melons crawl a lot. You'll see some squashes, they're big and they crawl a lot. So I'm going to put the crawly things in here and I'm very excited about it. We're going to see what all it can do. So let's take a closer look. What I want to show now is something I call the Three Sisters. Actually, I didn't coin that. I think the Indians coined that years back, or the early settlers. And it's the idea of symbiotic planting, where one plant helps another plant. What I have here is corn, pole beans. I inoculated the pole beans, so the pole beans will be fixing nitrogen in the soil, which will feed the corn. The corn's going to grow tall. The pole beans will crawl up the corn, so a lazy guy like me doesn't have to bend over and pick the beans. I can just walk up and pick them off the corn. And then the third plant of the Three Sisters is squash. So pole beans, corn, and let's walk over here and take a look at the squash. Here you can see I have 4 different squashes planted. They're up and doing pretty good right now. Next week today is Friday, probably late next week, I'll go plant some more squash in here. Primarily, we live on a plant-based diet. We just think that's the healthiest diet. And as I mentioned earlier, part of our goal is to be as self-reliant off the farm as possible. So mostly we eat the plants out of the garden, breakfast to lunch. Lunch is usually a salad or something fresh picked out of the garden. I've talked about my beautiful smoothies, which I'm sure everyone will want to go make tomorrow morning for breakfast. And then there's all sorts of whatever's fresh and seasonal, Tina will be doing a masterpiece with for supper at night. Beyond that, the meats that we eat are primarily off the farm. Venison, of course, which I obviously spend a lot of time growing deer. And the ducks, occasionally I'll get a turkey off the farm. But we also raise our own chickens. We have both meat chickens as well as egg chickens. And in fact, I've got a video going now that you'll see soon where we took chickens from baby chicks all the way up to processing, and we just finished that process about a week ago. That's our meat chickens, and that's an important part of our diet, all organic as I mentioned before. The other thing is we get fish out of the pond, and so fish from the pond, meat chickens, wild game from the farm, and beyond that a heavily plant-based diet. From there, on another video, I'll go take a look at the fruit orchards, of which we have a lot of fruit trees, and they bear at various times. So anyhow, that's the garden tour. I hope you've enjoyed it, and look forward to coming back in the summer and showing you what the midsummer garden looks like.